What's good? It's Woog. I want to speak briefly about this interview with His Excellency Ade Oladipo with DAZN. Just interviewed Turki Alalshikh, the Saudi Arabian matchmaker, if you will, the person pretty much heading the boxing division, at least, of Riyadh season. And we've seen what the Saudis have been doing. There's been a lot of speculation, so much discussion around how the Saudis just overnight have been kind of changing the sport of boxing. There's been a lot of question. Is this good for boxing in the long run? Is this exposing a lot of what's wrong with boxing? Are they turning a profit, or are they just, flushing money as a marketing expense to get more eyeballs on the country and to kind of position themselves as the global Las Vegas, if you will? So much speculation, so much conversation. So I think that it was very important and interesting that this interview took place. And there's some interesting takeaways here. One, I'm convinced that he is a boxing fan. Like Teddy Atlas even spoke about it on his show a few weeks ago. It was shortly after they did the Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou. Teddy Atlas believes that His Excellency is truly a boxing fan. And if you listen to him talk about the sport, and I'm talking about Turki Alalshikh, he knows his history. He's either done a ton of studying, or he's been dialed in and has been paying attention to the sport very closely. In fact, he pointed out in the interview that in the 70s and 80s that boxing was the #1 sport globally. Now, there would be some discussion around whether that's true. Was it soccer? Was it baseball, right? There were a lot of different sports that were vying for the #1 position, but he said that boxing during the 70s and 80s was the #1 sport. And now, according to his studies, and he's got different people, he says, researching these things, boxing's number 14, the number 14 sport in the world. So he's been paying attention, and he was talking about who his favorite all-time fighter is. At first, Ade Oladipo was guessing. He was saying, is it Muhammad Ali? Is it Mike Tyson? Is it Sugar Ray Leonard? Is it Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather? Alalshikh eventually said, no, I'll tell you. It's Larry Holmes. And Larry Holmes was in Saudi Arabia for that Fury versus Ngannou fight, as well as several others. But his other favorite fighter, aside from Larry Holmes, is Roberto Duran. So let's just talk about the positioning and what they are doing and what they are looking to do. So we've already seen what they've done. They put on Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou. They put on Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin the same day as Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker. They were angling at a AJ versus Wilder showdown. Alalshikh actually still wants to see that fight. But the way that he sees it, he wants the winner of Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou to fight the winner of Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, which is taking place in February. Now, obviously, a lot of us boxing purists have a problem with that configuration, because it's like, okay, so you mean to tell me that if Francis Ngannou beats Anthony Joshua, however, for whatever reason, he gets a shot at undisputed heavyweight champion? Well, okay, after he performed the way that he did against Tyson Fury, he was pretty much rushed and thrust to the front of the line because of how much he exceeded expectations in that one. And then on the Anthony Joshua side, I've heard a lot of pushback. The people are saying, you mean to tell me that, by beating Otto Wallin and Francis Ngannou, you get a shot at undisputed? But then, think about it. Anthony Joshua he is a two-time unified champion. And then when he lost those back-to-back to Usyk, he lost all 3 belts, and then Usyk defended it successfully against AJ, right? So he lost those belts. It's not like he went straight from that to Otto Wallin, then Francis Ngannou. No, he fought Jermaine Franklin, then Robert Helenius. Say what you want about either one of those. I'm just saying that these are the guys he's fought since he lost those back-to-back fights against Usyk. So he fought Franklin, Helenius, and then Otto Wallin, and now he's fighting Francis Ngannou. So it's not just that 2-fight winning streak. It's a 4-fight winning streak, but I get the argument against it, because it's not like he's fought any of the top 4 to top 8 guys, right? He didn't fight Filip Ergovic, who looks like he's just getting passed over left and right. And he's not even in the other showdown that's going to be taking place on the Saudi staged undercard. And that fight is going to be Zhili Zhang versus Joseph Parker. And props to Joseph Parker, because I swear, every time he would essentially climb the mountain, he would lose. He would lose to Anthony Joshua, after becoming the WBO champ in that vacant title fight against Andy Ruiz several years ago. He loses to Anthony Joshua in that title unification match. Then he has a very disappointing loss against Dillian White. And then he climbs some more. And then he kind of gets smashed eventually by Joe Joyce. And then he finds himself in the fight against Deontay Wilder, where it's like a huge risk. I mean, people generally thought that Wilder was going to knock Joseph Parker out. I was saying exercise caution. I thought that there was a better likelihood that Parker pulled off the upset than Otto Wallin pulling off the upset against AJ. I thought that Joseph Parker was much more of a live dog in that one. And he pulled off the upset. He beat Deontay Wilder. So with that comes all kinds of opportunity. So I couldn't be happier for Joseph Parker now finding himself in this position. It might end up being a be careful what you wish for, depending on how him versus Zhilei Zhang plays out, but that is what's taking place on the undercard. So again, Filip Ergovic is kind of left out of that mix, and AJ didn't fight Zhilei Zhang or Deontay Wilder, right? So you could argue that his path, if he is to get this next opportunity after beating Ngannou, isn't really legit in terms of meriting that type of undisputed opportunity. That's assuming that the winner of Fury versus Usyk, or if they run it back, still hold all the belts. I mean, the championships might get fragmented. But aside from that, we see what the Saudis have already done, right? But if you listen to the commentary, there were some things that I found pretty fascinating. One, I didn't know that there was like a health issue with His Excellency. He said that over the past few years, he has been going through some serious health issues, and that has basically expedited his productivity and his ambitions here. So I don't know specifically what's going on with him, but it sounds like it sounds like he might. I'm not saying that he is, but it sounds like he might kind of be on the clock, or at least how he views how he needs to handle these next steps in terms of making his boxing dreams and his business dreams come true. And when he was talking about what was wrong with boxing, he pointed out the promoters. He was saying that they don't want to put on the best fights with their fighters because it costs too much. So he made mention of that. Promoters should be on notice, right? And it's almost like that's the new sweepstakes if you're a fighter, right? You want to fight in Saudi Arabia because they'll open up the purse strings and you'll get paid handsomely. And we'll talk about, again, whether these endeavors are profitable or if they are just spending money to gain reputation, and if this business model is not sustainable. But one way I was looking at it was like, damn, it's almost like a hardcore boxing fan. When you watch what the Saudis are doing, I think I just said this on Twitter/X, it's almost like a hardcore boxing fan just came up on $1 trillion and was basically able to make all of his dreams come true, right? That it feels like that's what's going on here. Like, it's almost like he just has a blank check to pay whomever, whatever, to stage the fights that he wants to see. Like, he wants to see Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol. He wants to see Devin Haney versus Gervonta Davis. Now, QT, in my comments when I had posted something recently, he said maybe His Excellency will even bring Al Heyman out to the public. And I'm like, whoa, slow down. Public appearances from Al Heyman. Now, if the Saudis are able to do that, shoot, you might as well stage an Al Heyman press conference / interview as the headliner. I don't care who you put on the undercard. Al Heyman publicly being visible and talking might have to be the headliner. But these are some of the dream fights that His Excellency wants. And he's shown that he's got the ability and the willingness to pay whatever needs to be paid to get these mega fights done. So this kind of creates like a two-tiered boxing ecosystem. If fighters are not going to be fighting in Saudi Arabia for their next fight, they're going to have to get paid less, or whatever the current we'll call it the regular promotional boxing market is, right? So whatever like a Lee Wood would be getting paid on regular DAZN, or whatever O'Shaquie Foster or Luis Alberto Lopez or whomever is fighting on ESPN, ESPN Plus, or DAZN, or regular non-pay-per-view Showtime, like Ray Vargas or somebody who I just saw that they're making. Wait, Ray Vargas, I believe, is going to be on one of these Riyadh season undercards against Nick Ball. If I think I read that news earlier today correctly, Ray Vargas and Nick Ball on one of the Saudi Arabian undercards. I think that was my understanding. But these guys are not only launching these great mega events, but they're also just packing and stacking that undercard to where it's almost unrecognizable by boxing standards. It's almost like a wish list of sorts. So again, it could create like this two-tiered boxing ecosystem. And I heard Eddie Hearn, a month or two ago, this was probably even before the AJ versus Otto Wallin fight. He encouraged his fighters to not sit back and wait for the call from Saudi Arabia. Basically, he's suggesting, don't put your career on pause. Don't just stagnate your career and hope that you get that bag from the Saudis. No, resume your career, fight these other fights, and then maybe, you get an opportunity to fight in Saudi Arabia. So, I wonder how regular promoters are feeling about the takeover of the sport, essentially, by Saudi Arabia and His Excellency. I wonder if they feel threatened. I mean, right now they're going along for the ride. And His Excellency said as much in the interview. He said, why not hop on the train if you are Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, who, they're going to have their own boxing card where it's like 5-on-5, right? 5 Queensberry fighters, Frank Warren, 5 Matchroom fighters, Eddie Hearn. And they've been like sworn rivals for like some time. So again, even the promoters are capitulating and playing ball. Remember when they had that press conference for that Day of Reckoning event where you had, a lot of the major players sitting in the same room and acting cordial and friendly amongst each other. It was almost surreal to see that. But that just shows you just the power of the money and the influence that the Saudis are wielding in the boxing space right now. But yeah, conventional promoting is one thing that His Excellency pointed to as a problem with boxing. He said they don't want to put on the big fights because it's too expensive. But he also pointed out that some of the fighters don't want to fight the big fights because it's too risky. So he is acutely aware of some of the ducking, essentially, that goes on and some of the promotional avoidance that goes on. And he sounds like he wants to take that on head on. So he's reached out. He said he reached out to Al Heyman and that he wants Devin Haney to fight Gervonta Davis in Saudi Arabia. And when you listen to him talk about Muslim fighters like Artur Beterbiev, Devin Haney, he refers to them as, his Muslim brother, right? So he especially wants Devin Haney to fight in Saudi Arabia. And he was also talking about like the marketing pieces, like, you've got to have a great flyer. You've got to have a great trailer. He wants to get cinematic about this. He wants to, he's backing that Undisputed Boxing video game. Now, if you're like an NFL fan, think about the impact that John Madden football had over the decades on the sport, on the NFL, how much it just further popularized the sport. His Excellency sees the value of a strong video game, a thriving video game, and the fact that boxing hasn't had one since for the past 10 or so years. So he's going to be backing the production and marketing of that video game. He wants to put on boxing TV series, documentaries, and so forth. So he's taking a very holistic look at the sport, and he basically wants to change how boxing promoting is done. So he wants to actually fundamentally reconfigure the landscape. So existing players, maybe they should feel threatened if they don't want to change their ways. Now, again, how do you make for a profitable, sustainable boxing business? Now, maybe the Saudis just end up laying the groundwork and then other promoters are able to kind of piggyback off that. And maybe if they can grow the sport, because he also sees that it's key to grow the sport, because people look at things in different ways, right? Like, fighters get paid in some cases more than the actual market bears. Like, for instance, let me just throw out a name, and not to disparage anybody, but like Teofimo Lopez seems like he feels and thinks that his value from a business standpoint is greater than it actually is in terms of eyeballs or people who would pay for your pay-per-view. Now, keep in mind, Teofimo Lopez usually fights on regular ESPN. I think a lot of fighters have been accustomed to getting paid more than the market bears, and different promoters like Eddie Hearn will point out that that is not sustainable. So it's like, in order for fighters to get paid a lot, for the great fights to be made, and for the promoter and the event to turn a profit, you kind of have to grow the sport. You've got to get more people to like boxing and to get into boxing. And, PBC, to their credit, that's what they were initially trying to do when they had the CBS deal prior to the Fox deal, when it was like Keith Thurman versus Sean Porter or versus Danny Garcia. They were trying to put it on regular TV, not even cable TV, but regular channels, to grow the sport, to get more eyeballs on their product, to be able to sell ad dollars and, basically have the same advertisements that would be running, for NFL games, and they would be advertising boxing events during NFL games and hopefully grow the sport that way. Well, it didn't work out for different reasons. And one of those reasons really is because the way that people consume content is different. People aren't watching channels 2, 4, CBS, ABC, Fox like that anymore. Hell, people aren't watching cable like that anymore. It's fragmented. People are either streaming on Netflix, Hulu, Disney, Apple, you name it, right? All these different platforms. Hell, Amazon Prime, where PBC struck their new deal. And we'll see how that all works out. But even furthermore, TikTok, if you want to really know who's stealing the eyeballs, it's TikTok and YouTube that are stealing a lot of the eyeballs and are taking up a lot of those content watching hours, to where cable suffers, regular TV suffers, and even streaming, your other streaming platforms suffer. So content consumption is changing. So we'll see how these things play out, but check out that interview with His Excellency if you haven't. It was really interesting. He brought up a lot of things. He brought up a lot of what he feels is wrong with the sport. And another thing that he noted was the sanctioning bodies. He was talking about how there are 4 belts, and he was just talking about how kind of ridiculous that is. So I wonder how the sanctioning bodies feel. And by the way, remember when Mauricio Suleiman, I think it was the WBC, who said that they would not sanction Beterbiev versus Bivol because of the Russia-Ukraine war? Well, let's see if he gets on board. If they stage this in Saudi Arabia, if Mauricio Suleiman and the WBC come around and want to be a part of that extravaganza, I suspect that it's a strong possibility that they change their mind, because I think that when he initially said that, he thought that it might just be like a top rank event or a matchroom event. But now that the Saudis want Beterbiev versus Bivol, let's see if the WBC comes around and makes this a battle for undisputed rather than just 3 of the belts being on the line. But yeah, Alalshikh also, like I said, mentioned the sanctioning body. So I wonder if somehow there will be some sort of like a belt consolidation. I mean, ideally you would just have one, right? For much of boxing history, you had 2 major ones. You had the WBC and the WBA. And then you've obviously had the unofficial, but very meaningful, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, the ring belt. And then after that, you had the IBF and then the WBO. And for some time, you had the IBO, who's no longer one of the major 4 anymore. But yeah, His Excellency also mentioned that too many sanctioning bodies is a problem. And the last few notes are, he wants, Conor McGregor to participate in a boxing fight. He doesn't want there to be any more like YouTube fighters. Like, he doesn't sound like he's really hot on that idea. He doesn't love that part of the boxing game. And when pressed, he said, maybe we do it and it's something else, but I'm about the fighters. I'm about the true boxing, the real fighting. That's what Alalshikh seems to really be into and what he wants to promote heavily. And he said that he wants the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol to go up in weight to fight Jai Opetaia, who's going to be fighting Maris Briedis on this Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk undercard. And the fact that His Excellency is talking about, Beterbiev versus Bivol winner fighting Opetaia, it almost makes you think that he thinks that Opetaia is going to beat Briedis in this rematch. We'll see. I can't wait for that fight either. Joe Cordina is going to be on that Fury versus Usyk undercard as well, defending his IBF junior lightweight title against Anthony Casace. But yeah, very interesting interview. Give it a listen if you haven't. And there were some good tweets that kind of bullet pointed some of the major things that came out of the interview. But there were some other heavy notes, like the ones that I mentioned earlier in this video, that were not covered in that tweet, in terms of how Alalshikh kind of surveys the boxing landscape and what they're really looking to do. But I still wonder, without growing the sport and growing the sport's global fan base, the fan base in America, the fan base everywhere else, can you make this a sustainable, profitable boxing business where the fighters still get paid well? We'll see. I hope so. I hope that this does, in the long run, boost boxing. I hope it generates more fans and all of that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.